All right, here we are. Looks like. All right, welcome. It looks like we made it, at least on Facebook. So, I want to welcome you to episode 4 of our series on why good people go toxic. And that's what we're talking about tonight is when good people have bad behavior and how they slip into toxicity. So just a couple of things you probably noticed. I have a new setup or background. That's because I spent yesterday and the day before moving, and so I'm super tired and my arms are all bruised up, but here we are. But let's do a quick recap on how we got to this place where people are in a spot in the workplace in which they're falling to the dark side and doing more and engaging in more toxicity and why that happens. Okay, so first off, we talked about how bullying and toxicity develop. A lot of it, again, as we said in the previous episodes, is a lack of accountability and people not speaking up or saying anything, and it becomes normalized and part of the organizational culture, embedded into the values and norms, so that people are expected to engage in toxicity and bullying and are rewarded, encouraged, and it is sustained. And so it becomes everyday work for many people. It's one of the reasons that nurses have researched and written about workplace bullying and call it eating their young, because they know it's not a one-off, and they know that when nurses are when they're accepted into the nursing program, that's when toxicity and bullying starts. So they're socialized into those roles, bully, bystander, or person who's being bullied, and that it often can, for many nurses, go through their entire career. They may move different jobs, but they may go from one toxic bully culture to another. I mean, eating their young means they're socialized into bullying, starting in academics, okay, and ending when they often resign or leave the profession. But how is it sustained? Because that's really what we want to understand, and that's what this episode 4 is about. Episode 4 is about how is bullying sustained, okay? Because it's one thing if somebody comes into the workplace, they're toxic and they're a bully, and then that person leaves. If it was just about that person, what should happen is when that person cycles out of the workplace, what should happen is that person leaves and bullying goes with them. But because it's embedded into the culture, it's normalized into everyday work. Even though that person leaves, what happens is somebody else fills that role. Okay? There's a role change. There's a role shift, as we might say in sociology, right? Somebody shifts into that other role. And what happens is if you are not the bully or the abuser in the workplace, you're a bystander or you're the person being bullied. And what happens is people see the power that the abuser in the workplace has, because that person, again, whether people are scared, whether it's groupthink, whether they're going along to get along, whether they're trying to use that abuser to get what they want, it doesn't make any difference. The motives is people are watching that abuser. They're watching what is happening to the bully. And the bully doesn't have to be at the top, even though we know oftentimes they are. I think the Workplace Bullying Institute says about 63 to 65% of bosses are bullies. So they're often at the top, okay? But that doesn't mean that that's where they started, okay? So bear with me here just a little bit. So you have somebody who is toxic or a bully, an abuser, and they have power. be it legitimate power or not legitimate power. They still control what people do. Because people are afraid of them, and people don't, people just go along with them because it's easier. And what happens is, I'm definitely going to have to be getting some curtains because it's super sunny, and so I apologize if it's too bright in here. But I didn't have time to get curtains, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so what happens is people just go along with them, and they get used to the chaos, right? They like the chaos, and that becomes normalized. And one of the things that happens with people who are being bullied, right, recipients of bullying, they also get used to the chaos. But the other thing that they're doing is they're realizing that, yeah, it becomes normal everyday life, but they're getting the short end of the stick. Bystanders might be getting some of the short end of the stick, but the person who's being bullied is getting the worst deal, period. Because everybody thinks they're the problem. They're often very isolated, very excluded, and they are bullied oftentimes by everyone else in the workplace. So what happens to you when that is your life, your everyday work life, you become extremely disempowered. You just become very, very angry and bitter. And frankly, rightly so. So what happens is you realize that you're not getting anything, and the people who are getting something are the ones who are doing the abusing. And again, often what happens, again, remember, there are role shifts. A bully, like a bystander, might shift into the role of a bully when a bully leaves. One of the worst bullies I ever had actually left the workplace. And I can remember I called my friend Mario up and I said, "Ooh, yay, so-and-so is leaving the workplace. I'm so happy." And he said, "Jan, stop." Right? He said, "Don't think that things are going to get better. Somebody else is going to come in and be the bully." And he was absolutely right. The new person came in, they were socialized into and took over the role of bully. And many times, because the bar is so low in bully culture already, that new person just comes right in, is socialized right into that low bar, and the bar goes lower and lower and lower. Okay, if that makes sense, right? So that's how, again, people come in and they shift roles. Now, it doesn't always happen like that. Sometimes there can be internal shifts, right? When I got hired, there was somebody who was bullied, and they brought in another person. That person who was bullied shifted and role shifted into a bystander, right? And somebody else became the new victim of workplace abuse. So there are all kinds of shifts. And this is and so you become, over the years, especially if you have stayed in this for 10, 20, 30 years, which is not necessarily, I mean, that's more the norm than we expect or think. What we think it happens, and this is what many experts has happened to many of the people who speak on workplace bullying. They were bullied, they cycled out. Okay, because they couldn't take it, they got out of it and then went to talk about it. Okay, and I cycled out. Okay, I spent over 20 years in it, which is a heck of a long time if you ask me. But I eventually just couldn't take it and I cycled out of it. But I want to talk about the last year that I was in bully culture. And because I think this is really important, is I had been bullied for so long that I really became immune to what people were doing to me. It just didn't faze me anymore because I had really been bullied, and I didn't care what they did or anything like that. But I still hadn't dealt with or healed I hadn't dealt with the bullying. I didn't realize the impact it was having on me because it was part of my normal life. I didn't realize what it was doing to my self-esteem. I didn't realize what it was doing to my self-worth. I didn't realize how I viewed myself as a professional until I cycled out and got out into a safe environment on a regular basis, rather than going to an abusive environment every day for 20 years. Okay, and there were no honeymoon periods. There were no honeymoon periods. It was always very abusive. And so I didn't realize the damage that was being done to me until I was physically out of it. But that last year, I really didn't care. I really didn't care about what people were doing to me. And I thought, I'm pretty sick of it. I'm pretty sick of it. And I started to hit back with what it was that they were doing to me. You're going to send me a nasty email. Look, I'm going to send one to you, and then I'm going to go further and take you down a few pegs because I've got some skills, because I learned from being bullied how to do it well. And so that last year that I was teaching, I was very disempowered. And it was very, very disempowering. And also, we are not isolated. So I'd also had some things happen in my personal life that didn't do me a lot of favors. And I was just feeling, both in my personal life and in my work life, like, go F yourself, right? And I got sick of it. And what happens is you then start to engage in bullying behavior or unprofessional behavior or toxic behavior because it's a form of empowerment. And not only is it a form of empowerment, when you're doing it back and you're doing it better than the original bully, you can see that they don't like it, and you watching them squirm, and it doesn't, not that it makes you feel good, it gives you a sense of power. And so people then move from one role to another role, R-O-L-E, right? Bystander to recipient, to the person being bullied, and even to the person who is bullying. That is why many times you will hear abusers and bullies. Part of it is manipulation. Part of it is that they started their journey into being a bully as one who had been bullied, right? So they might have been bullied in the workplace and eventually cycled in to become the toxic person that's doing the bullying because that was their way to get ahead. You can only be walked on so much in the workplace until it dawns on you that the way you get ahead is to engage in the behavior that is rewarded. And in bully culture and in toxicity, it's in fact bullying. Okay? And again, because bullying is normalized and the bar sinks, and that's what's normal. So yelling at it in a meeting, if recipients do and mirror the behavior back because that's what the standard is. It's just not acceptable for them to do it because they're viewed as the victim. And so when it's done, that's what you then replicate, especially if there's no accountability or there's no one stepping in and saying, oh, hey, we aren't doing this. That becomes the norm. So you have a meeting where the people are yelling at and screaming. It's not a one-off. It's not a one every 6 months. It's an every week faculty meeting, right? Where tensions are high, bullying and abusive behavior happens. And so you eventually get to the point to becoming toxic because you realize that if you want that promotion, if you want that raise, if you want to be, to be able to do what you want to do in the workplace, that the only outcome or the only action that you can take is to become the person that was bullying you. And it doesn't happen overnight. This is a long process where you are being, hurt from the outside. And if you're not, self-protecting and putting your armor on, it takes a toll on you, and you become so disempowered in the workplace that sometimes the only option is to engage in that behavior. And it is, we're socialized into those roles. We're socialized into those roles, and those roles shift. So you can start off as a recipient of bullying, become a bystander, become a bully, become a bystander, become a recipient, etc. And many times, the longer you stay in the workplace, given the culture, those roles will shift. And it's very, very problematic. And so that's how, over time, socialization in the organizational culture demands that we engage in unprofessional behavior, because that's what they're rewarding. And as most of you, just like myself, when I was in the workplace, I wanted to be, I wanted a raise. I wanted these things because I wanted my career to grow. And so in order to do that, sometimes you have to sell your soul, so to speak, and you engage in the things that were once done to you, because that's both a way to get ahead in the workplace. That's what your boss is rewarding. And maybe you want to become the boss, and so you started off as a bystander. Maybe you were a recipient, and then you moved into the bully position, and then you got promoted. And so you do those things that get you ahead in the workplace because it's normal. It's everyday work. And it is extremely problematic, obviously, for bully culture. And so, again, what we need to do is we need to stop excusing it, right? What we need to do is start, calling it out, right? Start bringing it to the forefront so that we can end workplace bullying. That's what we really want to do. And it's a process. Again, as I've said time and time again, if we want to stop it, it's a complex process to do it. But if you have the right tools, you can do it. And it's really, again, not that hard. So anyway, I really appreciate your being here with me. Next week is going to be super exciting. I'll have my whole setup better. I'll probably have some curtains on so it's not quite so bright in here. And also, we're going to talk about what you can do to help protect yourself and safeguard against being, even if you're in a toxic environment, there are a lot of things that you can do to both make yourself a better professional and at the same time protect yourself from toxicity and bullying, so that you don't slip into that slippery slide of, to get ahead, I need to be a bully, or to get ahead, I need to engage in toxic behavior. There are things that you can do to protect yourself, which make you a better professional, even if you're not experiencing toxicity or bullying, which, of course, I hope you never do. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. Sorry that it's so sunny, but hopefully next week we'll have a better setup. Things will go a little bit smoother. And as always, I hope you are doing well. If you need anything, you can always email me at jan@stopbullyculture.com. And I'm going to put a couple new things, hopefully, on the shop this week for bystanders. So if you know anybody who's involved in workplace bullying, who is not the primary person who's being bullied, but they're a bystander, I'm going to put some stuff up on my website, which is shop.stopbullyculture.com. So other than that, I will see you for our final episode of our series on how good people become toxic.